Despite what the marketing departments tell you at these big camera companies, any camera that came out after 2018 is probably going to take a pretty incredible photograph. So if you are in the market for a new camera, why not look at something that you think is going to be fun to use and inspiring for you to go out and take more pictures? That was the exact thought process that landed me on this, the Fujifilm X-t30 Mark II. I've owned quite a few different cameras from different companies, and the main thing that they've all had in common is nothing. I've shot on micro four thirds, APS-C and full frame sensors. The only thing that I care about really when it comes to my cameras is how much I enjoy using them and whether they are going to get me outside and taking photos. After having my X-t30 Mark II for about a month now, I can confidently say that it has gotten me out the house more, and whenever I do go somewhere, I bring this with me. It's so small and compact that I don't really have an excuse not to. This review is not going to be super tech focused. If you want the full spec list, recording formats, all of that information is readily available online at different camera retailers. What I want to talk about is what the camera's actually like to use, any of the weird quirks that I've run into that might make you think twice about picking up this camera, or all the little benefits that I've had from using a Fuji system compared to something like Sony or Canon. To keep things fair and objective, I'm going to break down this first look review into two parts: positives and negatives. I'm going to start with the negatives and get them out of the way first. I think a big one for a lot of people will be the form factor. Fujifilm do some very cool retro styling for their cameras, but in all honesty, it's not very practical at all. I don't have massive hands, and even then, after a few hours, this does become quite uncomfortable to hold. Not to mention that my thumb hits the joystick and the quick menu buttons fairly often, so that changes my focus points, and sometimes I've missed a shot because the menu's been open since I've hit it accidentally. Now, Fuji do other cameras which have a more standard DSLR style body. For example, the Fujifilm X-S10 has the same sensor as this, has IBIS, and has a more standard body shape. That leads us on to another drawback of the camera, which is that this has no in-body image stabilization. For someone like myself who mainly does landscape and nature photography, a little bit of architecture as well, this isn't a massive issue, and I use my DJI Osmo, which is what I'm recording this on, for when it comes to my video work, so not having in-body image stabilization isn't a massive issue for me. If you're using longer length lenses for stuff like wildlife, it might be more of a problem for you, or intending to do a lot of video work and maybe some slower shutter speed photography. Just make sure to have a tripod on you. As expected in a camera this small, it only has one SD card slot. That isn't a huge problem, I don't think. In the 4 years that I've been doing photography, touch wood, I've never had an SD card fail on me, which... Scooch. As expected from a camera this small, it only has one SD card slot. Now, I don't think that's a huge problem. In the 4 years that I've been doing photography, I've never had an SD card corrupt on me. I've used SanDisk SD cards the entire time, and every time I put one in my camera, I make sure to format it. Now, I don't want to jinx myself, because that means next time I go out to shoot, it probably will fail on me. But it's something to be aware of. If you're doing weddings or you're doing any paid gigs, it is very nice to have that assurance that you have a backup of all the photos that you are taking. Not an issue for myself though. Whilst not necessarily a negative, it's definitely worth considering if you are going to buy a Fujifilm camera, and that is the lens mounting system. The Fujifilm X mount is not going to be as extensive as something like the Sony E mount, but you have some really great options, both direct from the manufacturer and from third parties. On this, I have the TT Artisan 27mm f2.8, which I got for £90. That is a really good budget lens and gives me about a 40mm full frame equivalent when it comes to the field of view. Now, a lens that cheap is going to have its drawbacks, but I think there are really great options out there for people more on a budget who are looking to get some nice pancake lenses, prime lenses, and you can even go to Sigma and Tamron for zoom lenses as well. Moving on to more of the positives of the camera now, and I want to start off with the image quality. Throughout this video, I would have been putting some pictures on screen that I've taken with the Fujifilm, either raw or from the JPEGs, and it really speaks for itself. I think the color science from the Fujifilm sensors is market leading, as well as having the option then to bake in these film simulations to save you time in editing. It's a really great piece of kit. And to contradict what I said earlier, I'm actually going to put the form factor and the ergonomics in the advantages category as well. I can throw this thing on a neck strap and carry it around all day. The camera body itself itself weighs a little over 300 grams, and then paired with a small lens like the one I have on it, it weighs next to nothing, and I can be walking around mountains, hiking, or doing a day in the streets and not even notice that I have this camera on me. Compare that to something that I've used before, like the Sony a7 III. That is a much bigger and heavier camera which needs much bigger and heavier lenses and takes up a lot more space in a bag and is a lot more noticeable when you have it around your neck. Also, top marks to Fuji for including a tilt-out screen instead of a fully articulating screen on a camera like this, which is clearly more orientated for photographers. I think it's nice to have the tilt screen, especially for low-angle shots in landscape. People often say as well that having a tilt-out screen like this makes it a lot easier to shoot from the hip if you're doing street photography. It makes it a lot less obvious that you're taking a picture. When the screen comes out to the side, it's quite clear that you're looking at the camera and doing something, but from anyone else's point of view, I look like I'm just looking at the top of the camera instead of at the screen. Another great plus of this camera, despite its clear photo focus, is the ability to put the film simulations over video as well. I think that's a really nice little feature to have, and whenever I make like little TikToks or anything, it saves me a lot of time color grading. I know that I can put my Kodak simulation from the camera and get some nice snippets when I'm out and about and not have to worry about putting them through DaVinci when I get home. This would probably be the part of the video where I would say who I think this camera is for, but I reckon this camera has such a broad audience, there's no point in me saying that. With the auto modes that you have on it, it's super beginner friendly, as well as the ability to shoot in those cool JPEGs. So if you're someone who's not very confident in photo editing, this is a great entryway into photography, getting some really nice looking pictures without the stress of color grading. Not only that, for someone like myself who's been doing photography a few years, it's just such a nice little camera to have and take with me on my day-to-day stuff. I don't want the headache of having a big full-frame mirrorless system with me at all times, and most of the time I would reach for this anyway if I'm just going out on a hike or going out into the city for the day. And if you do have any questions for me about what it's like to use, anything that maybe I haven't covered in this very quick review, then just leave them in the comments below and I will get to them as quick as possible.